Live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you from the Extreme Studios from the Extreme Movie Show Palace, just west of Orlando, Florida. I have, of course, from America's Heartland, the Great Midwest, RDV joining me today. RDV, I'm looking at my stock reports here. I'm taking the day off work because I feel like it. I'm having some hot ginger tea because I want to settle my stomach because today I spent a little bit of time this morning with some really disgusting things. Why is this appropriate, you may ask, or be hearing as you join our stream here, talking about bad versus good CGI and practical effects in general. A topic that one of our viewers had brought up recently on this live stream. And I think it's appropriate because, as RDV, you know that when we talk about movies that are recent or
Mhm.
old, and we always say we're 80s based, you and I have a tendency to go for the practical effects. Whether they're goofy, like Jackie Chan stuff and stunts, we know they're for the most part real and done, or even if they're greatly choreographed. Then we have the opposite side of the spectrum where you have a lot of CGI where instead of being used as an enhancement tool, it's almost like a crutch and it doesn't come across as believable, or maybe it does. But we're here today just to talk a little bit about what we like and don't like about it. And I would like to go first with something very obvious, something that was pointed out in some of the releases and trailers, something that was brought about that people didn't even bother to fix. I'm going to go immediately to Indiana Jones 5, a horrible, horrible film. And I'm going to go with the horse chase scene where you can clearly tell it's a stuntman. And not that that's a bad thing, but there's a few scenes where you can completely see the CGI, the de-aged face on them as they're turning around. I'm like, for a big budget film, you could have at least put a little effort into it because, boy, there's parts of that are really, really horrible. And that immediately jumps to mind. Now I go, for a movie that's that expensive, and a lot of the cost of that film is CGI. It's embarrassment that would allow that to pass, especially when you've had to reshoot endings and do things too. So that's something just real quickly that comes to mind for you for CGI or
I was gonna
non-CGI.
say a little quick on as far as you're bringing up CGI when they did the face over. It's not that the first time they done stuff. The first time we saw CGI over someone else's body, that was Tron Legacy.
Correct. Yes. And it was a little creepy then, and it was
Yeah.
somewhat new. You think it would have gotten better.
Yep.
Yeah. What's something you want to bring up and talk about that strikes a chord with you, CGI or practical?
CGI as far as being I would say as far as the most best examples of practical stuff currently today or just still today is the Walking Dead use of it on TV shows.
How so
Um,
specifically?
well, the zombies they could most back in the day, most movies, it would add in like okay, like you go to World War Z, it's all CG when they show you the zombies.
Yeah, that's right.
Where The Walking Dead takes actually when you see the zombies, it's actually people they hire and they painstakingly put them in makeup and CG, and add stuff to it, you know. So when someone gets bit, that's the blood spurting out. If you go to like you said, the movies lately, they always put like the CG stuff in there. So if the zombies aren't really even zombies, they're just computer animated. So I mean, for a TV show like this, they put a lot of money into that show. So I gotta say that's actually really cool to see that they're actually still doing that for TV shows. When they easily could just add in fake CG stuff.
Yeah,
But
I would agree. There's an argument about CGI that I kind of wanted to ask you about here before we give some examples. Maybe it might give a little bit of a filter for kind of what we're thinking, because maybe you're thinking differently too. But when this question was asked, I was like, we talk about it, and I think it's kind of obvious, but it's definitely one thing, maybe two here. There's an idea that if a movie's good, CGI, bad CGI can't make it worse. And the opposite, that if a movie's bad, great CGI won't make it better. I would disagree on that in the idea that, like, I'll use my next example. Um, I think absolutely 100% say the most recent example of this movie, Avatar, was The Way of the Water.
mhm.
Absolutely gorgeous. It's done very well. I think it's a horrible, bad film. I don't like it at all, but it's so seductively tantalizing when you look at it. And I would argue that almost anything James Cameron has done, he's done it very well. Whether it is CGI in this case here, or if he used practical effects, going back to Terminator, or a great blend of both of them, Terminator 2. I think he's got a guy that's got a great vision. You can like or not like the message he has in his movies, politically speaking, whatever it is you want to do it, the roles of men versus women, like Titanic or whatever. When I'm not really bringing that up, I'm just talking about the look of the film. One of the biggest issues I have with CGI, regardless of how colorful or bright it is, people say, well, CGI allows us to imagine and put down on film, which it's not film, it's digital, um, things that we couldn't do with practical effects that make it very difficult. So therefore, it opens up all these new landscapes. And I would argue, you know what? I really don't give a shit if it looks two-dimensional and flat, and my focus is supposed to be on the character, right in front of me. And it can be very distracting to me. Whereas if, like, say, John Carpenter had a matte painting in, I don't know, the Snake Plissken movie or whatever like that, Escape from New York, and it's a matte painting, but somehow it still almost kind of looks real. Sometimes something like that's a better touch than, millions of dollars spent on a very elaborate, colorful scene that people are going, hey, ooh, let me just show off to you just because we can't show you how great our VX team is, that's not really that impressive to me. What's your take on that good versus bad CGI, if it makes a film better or worse, or does it matter?
Well, I mean, some of the pros of CGI is that, well, let's say we're doing the Godzilla films.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's easier to they do that than actually have a guy in a rubber suit.
Right.
Like we just saw Godzilla versus Kong. You know, now was the CG clean? I take it with a grain of salt because of the fact that I know it's it's supposed to be fake. There's no such thing as a giant iguana or a giant gorilla battling each other. So I mean, if they would
Florida
have done
man
that,
would disagree with you, but go ahead.
no, if you if you would have done that as a practical effect, we're actually guys in suits, or it's I don't think it'd be as great. Now, I think they took an actual leap with that, and they paid off well. Where versus we've seen before, we've seen them where they took Godzilla and we just had we just saw his leg. It's at nighttime the whole time. I, honestly, sometimes CG can work out in your favor, and as far as for stunts, if it's too dangerous of a stunt, they use CG instead of using a stuntman. But sometimes practical effects are awesome, like scanners when the guy's heads explode. You
Oh,
know,
Scanners is tremendous. Yeah, that's a
yeah.
good call. We haven't reviewed that yet here on the Extreme
No,
Movie Show,
so I
but
said
that's
like
being 80s based. We should.
so. Yeah, so you see like the gore font, like CG when like I said, you can use it for certain things. It looks kind of hokey, but when you use when you're able to create a movie without having to rely on CG, there's just like an awesome, like, beautiful art to it. As far as like we look at Evil Dead 2, the whole cabin scene, it's all puppeteering.
Yes.
And then the camera tricks, when the blood spurts out of the wall, and then it goes back. All they're doing is fast forwarding and rewinding. You know, the same scene in there where Bobby Joe, the character Bobby Joe, there, she gets eyeball goes in her mouth. And this is it's on a string. The whole camera stuff. Sometimes if you do it wonderfully, it just fits, and it's just done amazing. It's like
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's interesting you bring those up because, the stop motion effects that we've talked about, um, in, like, say, heavy metal, for example, the rotoscope motion that's, somebody filmed and then they CGI. That's an
yep,
interesting thing.
yeah.
That's kind of cool looking because the movement is fluid and believable. And of course, you can take digital scans of things and create them and have your assets, as the programmers would call them, generally speaking. You can populate things and all that. But there's a certain level of depth I think that's missing. And even if you take Ray Harryhausen, for example, Clash of the Titans, we know Bubo the Owls is a fake thing, but it still looks fairly decent. I think it's not a complete turnoff. And I think a part of your brain recognizing something that's tangible, that's manipulated, that can look good. Whereas where if you have, like, say, the opening of the Lord of the Rings, they intentionally just show off to you how bright and colorful that they can do it, when they always put in moving water and sunsets and all that to give you to, I think, just try to overwhelm you with what they have, rather than going, is the meat and potatoes there and are we using it as an accent? And one example I'll bring up here of a movie that I think gets the gore part of it right, because gore is its own topic, violence. I absolutely love violence, and over the top violence just for its own sake has to be done in a way where you have to feel it, where you're disgusted by it, not made numb to it, or it's not laughable, like say in a lot of the Friday the 13th movies or later Halloween movies, right? But one movie that I thought was one of my movies of the year, I think it's from 2018, was a movie called Upgrade. It's, I still think, a great movie. It's a blend, I think, a little bit of science fiction and action, if you want to call it that way. Does not have a happy ending, but it has what I would call an appropriate ending. And what I liked about it was is that it's about a guy who has to get a who ends up getting a chip implant that he has to allow to take over his body, and because he's allowed this chip to take over his body, this AI gives him kind of like this fighting ability and stuff. And it's like the first fight scene or two, he's figuring out, okay, what kind of limitations does my body have? I can't believe I'm doing that. And you see the acting going on his face. So what CGI they do have with the practical blood effects in there, you go, you see the guy's amazement about it. It's an accent to what's going on. And then later on, you realize when it gets particularly graphic, he's disgusted by it, and it's a turnoff. And then whatever happens. And there's been a lot of great low budget movies that look great with some CGI. And I'm not to suggest that
Mm-hmm.
it's automatically going to suck. I think the best value is more in low budget movies, but that's a more recent one. I don't know if something else more recent comes to mind for you for good or bad CGI or practical effects, or something old. I'm curious to hear what your next choice is going to be.
Oh, practical effects. Well, I mean, as far as CGI, we always, a lot of people would say, "Oh, we hate CGI. Practical effects are so much better." The reason it is because there's a lot of CGI is cheap. It's it's rushed. It's not, they aren't given the time to actually do stuff with it. We've seen what James Cameron did and how much money, how much effort they put into Avatar 2. Now, like I said, now that being said, you can have a great looking movie with great CGI, but if your story sucks, your story sucks. And for me, that's Avatar 2.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks beautiful, but it's boring. uh, you can, like I said, you can polish a turd, but it's still a turd. But I honestly, I'm not really against CGI. I mean, and I'm not against, I've seen movies and people say like, "Oh, especially Pixar." He's like, "Wow, that had really bad graphics," But I'm like, but you know what? I'm very lenient when it comes to movies. I'm not too harsh on them. If I someone enjoyed it, that's good enough for me.
Right.
But yeah, but like I said, like Deep Blue Sea has some of the worst CGI in it. We see them back in the
Yeah.
day.
Deep
But
Blue Sea is horrible, just like
versus
the Meg.
no, but Deep Blue Sea was a good movie though. I liked it.
People enjoyed it and had fun with it, which is the key. There's
Yeah,
nothing fun or enjoyable about the Meg, which is like Deep Blue Sea without any personality, and it's just thrown up there.
I don't think the Meg was a flop, but it was still a fun movie though, for what it is. Um, it could have been a lot better. I mean, to me, the Meg should have been a lot bigger than it was. That's why we call it a mega flop. Um,
Oh,
but it's pretty much like it's like watching Wild Card with Jason Statham. It's straight to DVD. You're not really gonna expect much of it. But anyway,
well, you,
but
you made a comment there about
yeah,
effects, can be cheap, and
yeah.
so do you mean cheap the way they look, or cheap to make?
As far as cheap the way they look,
Yes.
we've seen that. Like I said, if you pause certain scenes, in certain movies, like you was it Eraser, and you
Yeah.
see the
Gator.
crocodile,
Yeah.
gator, whatever.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, you can tell it's not really there, and it's kind of shiny. We just watched a movie, The Flood, when the water's clear in Louisiana. So you can see the gator. I'm like, not really. It'd be kind of murky water. It'd be brown water. You won't be able to see it. Flood waters. They don't realize that when sand gets in water, it becomes flood water. It's murky. But anyway, but other parts where we've seen bad CG, I'm trying to think, because not really bad. I mean, Anaconda, that was all CG, the giant snakes. But Do you notice that they actually look better than what you see some of the CG today? Because back then they actually they limited how much they used it,
That's
but they
correct.
but they put the effort into perfecting it, so they
Yes.
had more time on it. Now, like you look at the big blockbuster movies, especially the Marvel movies and like the DC movies, they're rushing it. And the latest example, you look at the Flash, and you saw how bad that CGI was. Because and you even got people coming out making excuses why it looks so bad because well they only gave us a week to do it. And I'm thinking like
I think
possibly,
I think laziness
yeah,
is the word we're looking for here,
sure,
because to
yeah,
your point, they can sit there and say, "Well, we'll just get this and it'll be a good enough shot. We can fix it up in post." Right?
yeah,
And one of the interesting things too, I was thinking about what you're talking about is I remember, we've done some Cynthia Rothrock movies
yeah,
recently, and I've always hated writing by committee. One person writes it, maybe a second name at most, because maybe you're a writing team and somebody checks you and you have a personality or something with it, and they can check you and vice versa. So to me, if it's more than two writers, the movie's probably going to suck or not be good. I don't care how good the acting is or the effects or any of that. Doesn't matter to me. You can have somebody have a story, and then the writer's job is to take that story and put it in a way to make it, there. And the producer's job is to pay all the people, make sure everything's running, kind of like an ops thing going. But when you look, one of the things you and I have always talked about with all the martial arts movies and action movies we've
mhm,
covered, you're always going to say thank you to, our sponsors. And a lot of times there's like Kawasaki and all the motorcycle ones or guns or this or that. But you have your stunt team, right? I've
yes,
noticed a lot when I look at the closing trailers of some of these movies. A thought had occurred to me, if the visual effects team is the biggest group in the trailing credits, the movie's not too good. If the stunt team's bigger than the visual effects, it's at least going to be entertaining. And somebody I wanted to bring up who I've heard really positive and negative things about it, especially with the most recent movie and one that's going to be coming out later this year, allegedly. And I go back to this guy's filmography. That's Dennis Villeneuve, right? Or however the hell you say it, because he's got movies that look great, like Prisoners and Sicario. Are you kidding me?
mhm.
Arrival looks good. I'm not going to say I'm the biggest fan of that movie, but for God's sakes, the last two, Blade Runner and Dune, we had a lot of people join us when we covered Dune, and I thought at least it was somewhat comprehensible in today's world. I thought it was a great use of CGI that added to the story, because it's a hard story to put on screen. It really is.
I'm,
And a lot of people prefer like the David Lynch 83, 84 version, where it was from TV or whatever. We had a lot of people say it's a bunch of shiny shit. And I'm like, well, tell me how. And I go, well, it's really sparkly, but it doesn't tell a story. I'm like, okay, but yet you're telling me something like She-Hulk is wonderfully done. And regardless of how stupid She-Hulk may have been written or whatever you might say about its politics, it looked bad. And it's unfortunate because you had a beautiful woman doing it. It's just, I don't understand younger people, but then I go, well, wait a minute. It's kind of like us. Most people just think about when the year they're born and nothing existed before that. And I think that with CGI, if people have grown up and most movies have the big chunk of the CGI that you're talking about, maybe
yeah,
something like The Walking Dead does stand out as being, hey, kind of cool, because it's not CGI.
yeah, and too much to your point, it's a lot of people. They were born after practical effects are pretty much gone up the way of the dodo. I luckily I was born in '85, but I grew up with the last remnants of the '90s of basically just where CGI was starting to come into the picture. The first I want to say like I want to say the end the first beginning of the CGI. I said was the mid '90s. I want to say the Lost World. I think because I think they went away from what they did in Jurassic Park.
Yeah, a lot of people bring up Jurassic Park, where they go, no, that's a really turd. It's inaccurate. That was an interesting film because it feels like a big budget, fun summer spectacle. But
Mhm.
what they filmed it where in Hawaii, so it looks great on the outside, and
Yep.
they gave you dinosaurs, which they promised, and at
Me-
that time, it was
Mechanical
something
back
you
then.
hadn't really
Yeah.
seen before.
Yep. Using the mechanical dinosaurs actually and then adding a little bit of CG to it. Not too much, just enough that the make it look a little more realistic. But but they said like when I first saw the movie, I had no idea that it was actually practical effects. I thought it was CGI.
Right.
And until I read about it, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like they actually built, things, and now we see those walking with the dinosaurs at the zoo. You see them like at least I have up here. We have the mechanical dinosaurs and stuff moving their heads around outside, and then same way at the Minnesota Zoo. But I so yeah, so when it comes to CGI, I mean, a lot of people have grown up with CGI, so they're just used to it. So when they go back and see movies, they're like, well, that's kind of boring. It's limited because there's a lot more you can do with CGI than you can with practical effects, and it costs. I'm
It's
not. Even,
expensive
I don't know. I don't know how does it cost more for CGI?
because you're paying somebody that belongs to a union
Yeah,
typically, and you have
yeah,
rates for
yeah.
it. And so
It's
if you only want to donate a certain amount of your budget, but you increase the number of shots or how quickly you need them, in other words, you're reducing the time for it because the amount you're paying is fixed, then you get a rushed job. And people can talk
yeah,
about how efficient computers are and processing all that, but do you have to splice and resplice? And if you're talking hundreds or even thousands of shots, um, you got to sync all that stuff up. Whereas if you only have so much film, it's like, hey, you fuckers better know your line's cold because we're going live here, and
yeah.
we don't have enough for a second take. Boom, go. It's
Well,
it's it's almost like a crutch, really, because you learn to go. Well, I can get away with putting this in there, so let's just throw up the green screen and have you guys go through this a little bit. You know what
yeah,
I mean?
because like if you're doing stunt work and stuff like that, you shoot the pyrotechnics off. Well, you just use your pyrotechnics, so you don't have any more.
Correct. Better
Yeah.
get it right.
So I mean, for all you wrestling fans who like it when they have the pyros, and then now they're gone. Now they're bringing them back. There's a reason why they're bringing them back because they were better with the pyros versus having the no pyros.
Yeah, you don't have
Uh,
the buildup. Let me ask you about this one because Tim, who's our viewer that recently had was asking about CGI and
Mhm.
all that. I'm going to reference a few older films here before we call it an afternoon. I wanted to ask you about something because Professor Pixel, the young 20-something, who also contributes here on the Extreme Movie Show, he's not with us right now today. Usually on Sunday nights he's here with us, and sometimes on Tuesdays. He and I have done a lot of TV, and one example I had mentioned to Tim offline was the Dark Shadows revival that we had covered here. Great costume setups, lots of burning candles and fog machines. That's great, awesome stuff. Um, but your guys' other channel that you guys run, the Geeky Puppet Show, I know you
Mhm.
cover a lot of things in there and do readings.
Yeah.
So this is probably more up your all's wheelhouse. One movie that I know we covered, I think in 2019, just like on our top 10 movies of the year, whatever. Not that we see all the movies, but it's just top 10 ones we're talking about. And we debate. I think Alita Battle Angel was up there. How would you think that fares as far as its CGI?
I have not seen that movie.
Oh, okay. I know it was
It,
brought
it,
up, and I
it
remember
was
thinking for what it is, I didn't. I thought it was pretty
so
decent.
so. I can say about the movie is that I know the people that normally I hang out with, they're very picky when it comes to certain movies. They don't like how storytelling is changed whenever you have source material ignored for agenda, and they're pleasantly happy with that movie. The fact that the people took time to respect the source material and not change it is and perverse it, like we
Right,
see with The Witcher.
right,
For the most part, they're changing everything because they have to fill in checkbox. Gotta have certain things. But what I've seen parts of it though, as far as the CGI, I thought it was actually done pretty well. They actually took their. It looks like they took their time. They knew what they wanted to do. They didn't waste it on stuff. That because they ran out of money. They actually had an idea going into it, so they knew what they're going to do. And the fact that the girl, um, who plays like the robot, I can't remember. She doesn't have her arms, right?
I don't recall.
I can't remember, but I think they actually because I remember they did actually the guys who worked with the movie, they actually had somebody come in and prosthetics, for this girl based off Alita's arms. I thought that was kind of cool. So they actually do that for now for people who are like missing limbs. Like
Mhm.
they gave like one kid to give him like an Iron Man arms. That was really cool. Um, but yeah, I mean the way they're able to make when CG is done right, and they actually it looks really great for science fiction stuff. I mean, look at Blade Runner. It just even 2049. The story wasn't as great, but then again, I'm one of those persons that like. Well, I saw the first one, the director's cut and all that stuff, and that was kind of too long. But
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 that's more practical effects,
yeah,
and
that's more
people
practical
love the
effects.
original Blade Runner.
Yeah,
And for the time, those shots like going down there with the advertisements and all
yeah,
that, people were like, "Holy shit, what am I watching?"
yeah. I do, like I said, I do love CGI when it's done correctly, But but again, you can also tell when CGI when they're using it because it's always shot at night. The
Yeah, and
CGI.
that's to cover stuff up. So
Yeah, I
and
know.
I hate that.
Uh,
That's
the
insulting.
rain
Yeah,
and everything.
and don't forget sandstorms, like in a couple movies we've talked about, and of course Godzilla. That's embarrassing to me, but
Oh,
and they're doing it. They're like, yeah, it's easier to do, so we'll do that. It's like, no, I want to at least believe or entertain the idea that you're going out of your way to do it, like say Mission Impossible, where they show you the scene, they show you what's going on, you know the scene, they set you up for it. We
hmm
talked about that, and you know what? I know him riding a motorcycle and just coming to a stop, looking over, is to kind of tease us into what they're doing. And I know that little pan over is CGI and modified with their drone shot and all that. I don't care because it's done well.
yeah. The sandstorm. And
Sandstorm.
was it in Ghost Protocol?
Yeah, number 4. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I love that. We just watched a movie called Heat Seekers, and they use a sandstorm, a fake sandstorm, but still, I thought it was done well for CG.
Yeah. Unlike Scorpion King. All
Uh,
right.
Another movie I did not watch.
I
So I
will
knew
bring this
better.
up just as far as the idea, and then one set of movies I'll recommend for people that are interested in great graphics and low budgets without CGI in them. I'm
Hey,
gonna go back to a movie that most people consider to be one of the greatest of all time. I'm not saying I love the movie, but I certainly love his performance in it, and I think it's a very realistic portrayal of a man. And of course, I'm going to go with Gone with the Wind. It's very lush. Obviously, when stuff's shot on film, there's a certain warmth and richness to it that digital cannot reproduce, no matter what. I don't know if it's the way lighting bounces off, the pigments of the material. You and I have talked about natural landscapes and being outside is always a plus. Movies like Willow that had it a lot, or other science fiction films that they shot in the Irish countryside, whatever that may be, just naturally look great, like The Northman and all that. You can't recapture the magic that atmosphere gives you in natural lighting. So that being said, that movie with the set pieces and everything, just mind blowing for what it was at the time. And of course, there's a great shot when you're trying to communicate messages that CGI you still have to have the eye for using that doesn't get conveyed. And it's like in gaming, no matter how realistic it is, and if you got a 4K machine, it still looks weird. But there's a scene of her or of Rhett Butler, I think, at the bottom, and he's looking up the stairwell, and she's walking down, and then they do this little eye, fuck me eye thing, looking back and forth at each other, and she's like, "Oh, who's that? Oh, that's Rhett Butler," and he's whatever. And so the point is that whole scene is set up to capture that moment of humans, not the backdrop or all the flash and dash and everything else there of what it means to be interested in each other, man and woman, which I think is great. And then I'll close with this, and I'll hand it over to you for your final thoughts and recommendations. I'm a big, huge fan of horror films. I love the Hammer horror films. Their take, an adult version, if you will, of the original Universal monsters. What's the difference between Universal monsters and Hammer? In my mind, Universal came out with the black and white ones in the 30s and 40s and all that. A lot of that stuff was in the public domain. And with copyright laws changing, we've seen what Disney's been able to do. They've been behind that a lot. You only have so many things that you can do, you know. And think Hammer's take on it, their film studio over there in Great Britain with Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and a bunch of others, they did the adult versions of it where the ladies were really nice looking, like nightgowns. They weren't skinny minis, they were built. Of course, you got Christopher Lee, 6'3", 6'4", of them, intimidating as hell. Just really great English countrysides, and even though they're set pieces, a lot of them too, they're somehow just more creeper and authentic. And of course, you can start off with Dracula and the Wolfman series. We've started covering some of those. It's just those are just fun to watch, and sometimes just more digestible, I think, than the old Universal ones. Those are nice, but more of a I'll watch that once in a blue moon. But man, the color of some of them. You and I've done, I think, the first werewolf one there too, and
Mm-hmm.
it's those are just anything great by Hammer. The movies may vary in quality. If you can imagine, they had Dracula in a disco in the 70s just to kind of modernize it. It sounds weird, but there's still something attractive about it. no CGI, all practical effects.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot to it that I think's really, really good out there. What would you like to close with as far as suggestions for good practical effects and or CGI?
Well, good CGI, I would say Transformers, the first one.
Oh yeah,
The way they drew Optimus Prime transforming the cars, they use a lot of real cars in there, and then plus when they go to the Transformer part, I thought that was pretty cool. Um, Practical effects, man. Like I said, we're talking about this behind the stage. Uh, Dark Knight, the car chase, cars exploding. It's not CG. It's actually like they actually have cars actually uh, with pyrotechnics and blowing up. Anytime you can do that without having to put CG into, like I said, CG fireballs are kind of cool. But, we always see that when we see guys walking away from like explosion. Like,
hmm
there's no way they're walking because it's all CGI. Real, if it was a real stuntman walking away from a house exploding, he'd be knocked over. Um, but as far as CGI, it's not always bad. You know, a lot of people loved King Kong. That
yeah,
was CGI.
yeah.
But you can also have CGI can also be for use and stuff like there's like you have like you have animated films like Toy Story. That was CGI.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
Pixar was known for
yeah,
really upping the quality of that too. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It all depends on which your taste. But if you like practical effects, I would recommend going back to going to the '70s and some of the '80s. George Romero, those
yes,
zombie movies.
yes,
So
that's a good
those,
call actually.
Dawn of the Dead. You know, there you didn't have any CG. It was pretty much it was just all practical effects makeup. You know,
I'll give you one because we didn't even touch upon this subject. It's one we did review a while ago here on Extreme Movie Show, our what we call our Extreme Classics version, where we take an old classic movie and talk about it. We did one with Robert Mitchum as a preacher and called Night of the Hunter, and there's a sequence in there, maybe second, third act of the where they're going down the river and you see him just being shot. And it's a black and white film, kind of following along like on horseback, way off and all that. And it's hard to describe, but you're looking at it, and you're like, "Holy shit, does this just look great?" And I would argue it would be very hard to find a better shot movie than that, even with today's budgets and huge crews that people can have. It's just you can't replace the vision that a director has and with what they want to see and how they want to shoot it. Sure, CGI gives them tools to do it, but like I said before, you can take a bucket of paint, throw it on something, and then take a straw and blow another one and call it art. Somebody might pay you a lot of money for it. Doesn't mean it's good. So if you like what you like, that's all that really matters. And so that's what we try to talk about here on Extreme Movie
um,
Show: the good, the bad, and the ugly, for sure.
final thoughts, man. We got you want to go for stuff that looked like it was CGI. Well, the White House in Independence Day, practical effects.
Yeah.
I for this day I was CGI. No, because
No
the model they blew up.
things that go boom.
uh, Going back to Alien, the xenomorph
Yeah.
when it bursts out of the guy's chest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Scanners are still the number one. I said I brought up you earlier. Scanners, you watch it with the guys. He's sitting there talking, and then his head just explodes like a watermelon, like Gallagher's there.
Why do people pop for that?
I don't know what it is. Uh, Inception is another one. They're just walking, and the room rotates. I know. We've seen it in stuff like 2000s, 2001, Space Odyssey
Mhm.
when the guy's going for the jog. It's just certain tricks of the camera and everything. Certain rooms, how they do stuff like that. Like I said but the number one I think that is probably the best non CGI thing in a movie they've ever done was the trench run in Star Wars.
That's a good call. Yeah, because
Yeah,
people remember that the rallying. Yeah.
yeah. The special effects team working on George Lucas, was just amazing. And like I said, you're going there, it's like, wow, this like I said, like this has to be CGI, and I'm thinking like, but it's like 1970, or 1981 or whatever it was. Uh, but yeah, hand painted starships and everything. It's like just whenever they're in the X-wings or the Tie Fighters, just that's all. It's fun, man. Uh, but yeah, so it all depends. Like I said, if you're gonna use practical effects are best used in horror movies. My opinion, action has to be action or violence. Or CGI is really meant for like King Kong and like dinosaurs and some other stuff like that. Fantasy. So
Yeah, that that's such an obvious one too. I know we mentioned Jaws just briefly early on
yeah,
too, and they always say, "Well, the shark broke. We can use it for a lot of film. We had to redo stuff and things happen." But yeah, I mean, it all comes down to people. I mean, we talk about if it's fantasy or characters and all that too, but I've always said it's hard for people to, I think, identify with superheroes generally because they're not human. Literally, their DNA's not, and they have powers and stuff. So maybe the story's more important or something. I don't know, or you humanize it, and that's why when we talked about Brightburn years ago, the interesting thing was that they kind of took the adult version of it too and made that graphic, but
hmm
not over the top, stupid or silly like a Monty Python sketch. So to me, how you use it again, that tool is really the most important thing. And that's all it is. It doesn't make up for anything because you have it. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you have taste. I mean, there's definitely a difference between it. And I think that that's going to be something that we talk about because whenever we talk about a movie, we're talking about how good it looks, what we like with the music, if that helps. We didn't even talk about that here, but definitely the CGI. I'll go ahead and say, yeah, CGI can ruin a good movie because it can be so damn distracting. If you loved Indiana Jones and you thought it was great, and you had the big nostalgia thing to it, that's great. But when you look at it, I'm just not buying it. I know Barbie's the huge thing that everyone's talking about. It's making some serious bank. The colors look great. I think they got the town right and all that stuff about it. But when I look at it, it looks like it's literally a plastic set or something, and yet it costs so much damn money because of all that stuff. And I go, well, that just again doesn't mean it's a blockbuster or going to be good. And a lot of these ones are failing miserably too. And you can argue what for, but just look good, damn it. I mean, look like you belong. That's a big part of it. That gets you halfway home. Because frankly, if you look good, you can get away with not being too good. If you know what I'm saying.
if you have a good enough story, bad CGI can might cripple the movie a little bit, but not to the point where it makes the movie bomb.
Look, Chopping Mall from the '80s has got really really bad effects in it, but it's still fun.
Short Circuit.
Everything was better in the '80s. I mean. You notice how cocaine's not cool anymore. We got to have a campaign to make it cool again. I don't know how that
Anytime
can
you
be
see
done.
cocaine in a movie, it's on CG because it doesn't exist anymore. It's outlawed.
Terrifier 1 and 2. I watched Terrifier 2, and
But
I don't know.
I want to mention though that Ed brought up American Werewolf in London.
Yeah,
Still the
Rick
best
Baker,
special effects transformation I've ever seen a werewolf. We've seen
Howling.
we've seen in other movies too where they try to do the werewolves, ginger snap and stuff, and the werewolves look retarded.
We
Sorry if
like
that's
ginger
yeah.
snaps, though.
I like gingers, but not when they snap. Angry gingers.
An angry ginger is the best ginger. All right, guys, there you have it. A little bit of CGI talking about here on the Extreme Movie Show with RDV from the Great Midwest. I'm your host, Rob. Thanks for watching. Normally, we don't do Fridays, but we decided what the hell it needs to be addressed. And I want to thank Tim for his question about it, too. Like I said, we kind of
Yeah.
started this on a whim. I appreciate everybody retweeting all that. We're getting close to being to the point where we go, hey, a lot of people are actually watching us now. We love the feedback we get. You guys taking time off. It's really the best thing you can do besides listening to us is letting other people know that we exist, and we appreciate you sharing some time with us while we just talk about what we like, which is movies. So if you have any requests, whether it's certain movies or a TV show you'd like us to do the season 1 review of and all that, let us know. Professor Pix and I are going to be finishing up this
Yep.
Sunday season 1 of Shyamalan's Wayward Pines. I believe we're on the last episode 10. We've done Dark Shadows, Twin Peaks, a bunch of others. We've all done a lot of shows, and there's so much out there. So it's never a question of what to talk about, except for it's what to decide to that's important. And it's a lot of fun doing that. Anything you need to plug, RDV, before we call it a night?
I'm just gonna. This should be called the good, the bad, and extreme.
Yeah, and Ed's saying bring back the top 10 someday. And
Yeah.
it's like, you know what? That wasn't our shtick, but it's always a shtick. And top 10s people seem to like too. So I could see some top 10s coming up here soon too. So we'll keep in mind with that, Ed. All right, guys. Have a good night. As always, stay extreme.